The summer heat pressed down on the Georgia pine forest like a living weight, thick and unrelenting. Talonige moved through the trees with the practiced silence his uncle had taught him since childhood, feet rolling from heel to toe, breath controlled, eyes scanning the undergrowth for broken branches or disturbed earth. He had been gone for 3 weeks, hunting deer in the Northern Territories with his cousin Hatcheti, and now he was returning home with meat and pelts that would see his family through the coming months. But something was wrong. The birdsong had stopped half a mile back, replaced by an oppressive quiet that made his skin prickle. Talonige paused beside a massive oak, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. The air smelled different here, acrid, burnt, wrong. He quickened his pace, abandoning caution for speed as he broke through the final line of trees and emerged at the edge of his village. What he saw made his heart drop like a stone into cold water. The longhouses stood empty, their bark walls blackened by fire. The central cooking pit was cold, its stones scattered and overturned. Cornfields that should have been waist-high with green stalks were trampled flat, the young plants torn up by their roots and left to wither in the Georgia sun. The horse pen stood open and vacant, the wooden rails splintered as if smashed by deliberate force. Talonige walked forward slowly, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. He had lived in this village for all of his 23 summers. He knew every path, every dwelling, every family. Now it looked like the bones of something dead, picked clean and abandoned. Talonige! The voice came from behind him, weak and trembling. He spun to find Onapoli, one of the village elders, emerging from the forest. The old man's face was gaunt, his left arm wrapped in blood-stained cloth. 2 other survivors followed him. Metalin, a young mother whose infant daughter clung to her chest, and Tuskegee, a boy of perhaps 12 summers whose eyes held a terrible new knowledge. "Uncle," Talonige said, using the term of respect for all elders. "What happened here?" Onapoli's jaw tightened. The settlers came. The ones from the new fort, the one they built on our treaty land, 3 miles east. They came 4 days ago, just after dawn, said we were stealing horses that had wandered onto our own hunting grounds, said we were a threat to their expansion. He spat the last word like poison. They took 19 of our people, Talonige. 19! Children mostly, some women. They burned what they couldn't carry and drove off all the horses. Talonige felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest, a sensation he recognized from the stories his grandfather had told about the old wars. "Where are the others? Where is my mother?" "Safe," Onapoli said quickly. "We scattered into the forest when we heard them coming. Most of the village made it to the hidden caves near the river, but the ones they took," his voice broke. "They're in the fort now, prisoners. The settlers claim they're being held as insurance against Creek raids." Metalin stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son is there, Tuskia. He's only 7 summers old." Tears streaked through the ash on her cheeks. "They said if we try to take them back, they'll hang them all from the fort walls." Talonige looked at the ruined village, then at the small group of survivors, and felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. The Treaty of Augusta, signed just a year ago, had supposedly protected Creek lands from settlement. It had drawn clear boundaries, made promises in the flowery language of the colonists. And here was the truth of those promises: burned fields, stolen children, a village turned to ash. "Where exactly is this fort?" he asked. Onapoli pointed east. 3 miles through the pine forest, near the bend in the Oconee River. They built it fast, 2 months, maybe less. Log walls, watchtower, about 40 settlers inside. They have militia from Savannah with them, soldiers who fought in the Revolution. They're not farmers playing at war, Talonige. They know how to fight. Have you sent word to the Miko? Talonige used the Creek term for the village chief, the leader who would traditionally decide matters of war and peace. "We sent runners yesterday, but you know how these things go. Councils take time, and the colonists know it." They built that fort because they're betting we won't act. They think we're broken after helping the British lose the war. They think we'll accept whatever they do to us." Talonige was silent for a long moment, watching smoke from the ruined longhouses drift upward into the humid air. He thought of his uncle's teachings, the lessons learned in the firelight during winter nights. A warrior does not seek war, but he does not run from it. A warrior protects the people. A warrior restores balance when it has been broken. "I'm going to look at this fort," he said finally. "I want to see it for myself." Onopoli grabbed his arm. "Talonige, if they catch you—" "They won't catch me," Talonige said. "I just need to see, to understand what we're facing." The old man studied his face, then slowly nodded. "Your grandfather would have done the same. But be careful, nephew. These settlers are afraid, and afraid men do terrible things." Talonige gathered his weapons, his knife, his bow, a small pouch of cornmeal for offerings, and set out toward the east as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The Georgia heat showed no signs of breaking, and sweat soaked through his deerskin shirt as he moved through the forest. He traveled in the old way, reading the land as his people always had, noting the game trails and water sources, the places where the pine forest gave way to hardwoods, the hidden ravines that could conceal a man or provide an escape route. As dusk approached, he smelled wood smoke on the wind and knew he was getting close. He climbed a tall oak on a ridge overlooking the river valley and finally saw it, the fort that had cost his people so much. It was crude, but effective, built from freshly cut pine logs driven into the earth in a rough square, perhaps 60 paces on each side. A wooden watchtower rose above the front gate, and Talonige could see 2 men with muskets standing guard. Smoke rose from multiple fires inside the compound, and he could hear voices, laughter, the sounds of an evening meal being prepared. They felt safe here, confident in their walls and their guns. Talonige watched as the light faded, counting the guards, memorizing the layout, noting the weak points. He saw the horse corral on the north side, at least 20 animals, including several he recognized from his own village. Near the corral was a low building, probably a stable. The main barracks sat in the center of the compound, a long structure with a stone chimney. And on the far side, barely visible in the dying light, he saw a smaller building with barred windows. The prison. He watched for 2 more hours as night fell, and the settlers settled into their routines. Guards changed at the watchtower. Men emerged from the barracks to relieve themselves, then returned. Someone played a fiddle badly, the notes drifting across the river valley. Eventually, most of the fires were banked, and the fort grew quiet, except for the guards. Talonige climbed down from his perch and made his way back through the darkness, his mind already working through possibilities. He had seen what he needed to see. The fort was strong but not impregnable. The settlers were confident, but confidence bred carelessness. And most importantly, he now knew where the captives were being held. When he reached the hidden caves near midnight, he found his mother waiting by a small fire. She rose when she saw him, her face tight with worry and relief. "My son," she said, embracing him. "Onopoli told me what you were doing. Did they see you?" "No, mother. I was careful." He sat beside the fire, accepting the bowl of stew she offered. Around them, other survivors huddled in small groups, families torn apart, warriors without weapons, elders whose wisdom seemed powerless against the brutal logic of settlement and expansion. His mother sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking, Talonige? I can see the wheels turning behind your eyes." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "The elders will counsel patience. They'll say we should wait for the Miko's word, send messengers to the colonial authorities, demand a council to discuss the treaty violations. And while we do all that, our children will stay locked in that prison, and more settlers will arrive, and the fort will grow stronger." "You're talking about retaliation," his mother said. It wasn't a question. "I'm talking about justice," Talonige corrected. about restoring balance. They came to our land, burned our village, stole our children. The treaty means nothing to them. It's just paper, words they ignore whenever it's convenient. We can't negotiate with people who don't honor agreements. We can only show them that there are consequences for what they've done." His mother was silent, her face unreadable in the firelight. Finally, she spoke. "Your grandfather told me once that the hardest thing about being a warrior is knowing when to fight and when to wait. He said that young men often confuse the two, and that confusion costs lives." "I know," Talonige said, "but grandfather also said that some injustices cannot be endured, that there comes a point when waiting becomes the same as surrendering. And you think we've reached that point?" Talonige met her eyes. "They have our children, mother. How much longer should we wait?" She didn't answer, but he saw the grief and rage in her face, the same emotions that burned in his own chest. After a moment she stood and walked to where Onapoli sat with two other elders. Talonige finished his stew and lay down near the fire, but sleep wouldn't come. He stared up at the cave ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of his displaced people, and felt the weight of what he was considering. This wasn't a raid for horses or a border skirmish. This was something that would change everything, that would force both the Creek and the colonists to face the truth that had been building since the revolution ended. The frontier was not at peace. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and Talonige was beginning to understand that he might be that spark. Morning came with thick fog rolling up from the river, turning the forest into a ghostly landscape where sound traveled strangely and visibility dropped to a few paces. Talonige woke to find Onapoli crouched beside his sleeping spot, the old man's face grave. "The Miko has arrived," Onapoli said quietly. "He wants to speak with everyone who witnessed the attack. That includes you, since you scouted the fort." Talonige rose and followed the elder deeper into the cave system, where a natural chamber had been turned into a temporary council space. Hotalgi Miko, Chief Hotalgi, sat on a blanket near a small fire, his weathered face composed in the careful neutrality that Creek leaders cultivated. He was perhaps 50 summers old, his hair grey at the temples, his body still strong despite his age. Beside him sat 3 other important figures: Menawa, a war leader from a neighboring village; Tastanagi, a respected elder known for his knowledge of treaties and colonial law; and Sanet Lichi, a medicine woman whose spiritual authority was recognized throughout the Creek nation. Around them, survivors from the attack sat in a circle, those who had seen the settlers arrive, those who had escaped, those who had lost family members to the raid. "Talonige," the Miko said, gesturing for him to sit. "Onapoli tells me you went to look at this fort. Tell us what you saw." Talonige described the structure in detail, the layout, the number of guards, the weapons he'd observed, the location of the prison building. He spoke without emotion, presenting facts the way his uncle had taught him, letting the information speak for itself. When he finished, Menawa leaned forward. "You're certain about the number of men? 40? At least 40, maybe as many as 50. Not all of them are soldiers. Some are settlers who've probably never fought in a real battle. But the militia men are experienced. They carry themselves like veterans." Tastanagi, the treaty expert, spoke next. "This fort is a clear violation of the Treaty of Augusta. The land they've occupied falls well within the boundaries we established. If we bring this to the colonial authorities in Savannah—" "The colonial authorities don't care," Metalin interrupted, her voice sharp with grief and anger. "They don't care about treaties or boundaries or stolen children. They want our land, and they'll take it piece by piece, agreement by agreement, until there's nothing left for us." "That may be true," Tastanagi said carefully. "But if we respond with violence, we give them the excuse they're looking for to break the treaty entirely. They'll say we're the aggressors, that they were only defending themselves, that we can't be trusted. And then the full force of Georgia's militia will come down on all our villages, not just this one." Talonige felt frustration building in his chest. So we do nothing? We let them keep our children as hostages? We accept that our village is destroyed and our treaty land is stolen? No one is saying we do nothing, the Miko said firmly, but we must be wise about how we act. Manawa, what do you think? You have experience with these situations. The war leader was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. I fought against the British during the Revolution, he said finally. I saw what happens when we get pulled into white men's wars. We lose either way. If we fight for one side, the other side punishes us. If we try to stay neutral, both sides call us traitors. Now the revolution is over, and the British are gone, but the Americans are still here, still hungry for land, still seeing us as obstacles to be removed. He paused, then continued. The question isn't whether we have the right to retaliate. We do. The question is whether retaliation will save our people or doom them. If we attack that fort, we'll kill some settlers, maybe free the captives. But then what? More forts will come, more militia, more justifications for taking our land. We'll be painted as savages who can't be reasoned with, and the whole Creek nation will suffer for it. And if we don't fight back? Tahloniga asked. What message does that send? That they can attack us without consequences? That our treaties mean nothing and our children are worthless? Sanit Lichi, the medicine woman, raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of spiritual authority. I have prayed on this matter and sought guidance from the ancestors. What I have learned is this: the path forward is not about choosing between action and inaction. It is about understanding what kind of action serves the people and what kind serves only our anger. She looked directly at Taloniga. You are young, warrior, and you feel the fire burning in your chest. I see it in your eyes. You want to make them pay for what they've done, and that desire is not wrong. But desire alone does not make an action just. We must ask, will this action restore balance, or will it simply add more weight to one side of an already tipping scale? Tahlonige struggled to keep his voice level. With respect, grandmother, I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. They violated the treaty. They attacked our village. They took our children. These are facts, not emotions, and facts demand response. Justice and revenge often wear the same face, Sanit Lichi said. The difference is in the heart of the one who acts. The council continued for another hour, voices rising and falling, arguments circling back on themselves. Some elders argued for sending a delegation to Savannah, for demanding the colonial governor intervene. Others suggested waiting, gathering more information, building alliances with other Creek villages before acting. A few voices spoke quietly in favor of retaliation, but always with heavy caveats about timing and consequences. Talonige listened to it all and felt his frustration deepening. He understood the complexity, the need for wisdom, the terrible risks of any action. But he also understood that while they debated, children were locked in a prison, his village lay in ruins, and the settlers were growing more confident with each passing day. Finally, the Miko raised his hand for silence. We will send messengers to the other villages, he announced. We will document every treaty violation. We will demand a council with the colonial authorities, and we will prepare our warriors in case diplomacy fails. But for now, we will not attack the fort. Is this understood? Heads nodded around the circle, some reluctantly, some with visible relief. The Miko's word was law, not because he ruled by force, but because the Creek people had agreed to follow their chosen leaders even when it was difficult. Talonige, the Miko said, you will not act alone against the fort. I know your heart, young warrior, and I honor your courage, but I cannot allow one man's actions to endanger the entire nation. Do you hear me? Talonige felt every eye in the chamber on him. He knew what was expected. A public acknowledgement of the Miko's authority, a promise to obey. But the words stuck in his throat like bones. I hear you, Miko, he said finally. It was not the promise they wanted, but it was all he could give. The council broke up, people dispersing to their temporary shelters throughout the cave system. Talonige walked outside into the humid morning, needing air and space to think. He found a spot on a rocky outcropping overlooking the forest and sat there as the fog slowly burned away. "They're not wrong, you know." He turned to find his cousin Hatchety approaching, the young man's face troubled. They had grown up together, hunted together, learned the ways of warriors side by side. "I know they're not wrong," Talonige said, "but they're not entirely right either." Hatchety sat beside him. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." Hatchety looked at him steadily. "I've known you my whole life, cousin. I can see it in your face. You're going to go to that fort, and you're going to do something that can't be undone." Talonige was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what Uncle taught us? About the old ways, before the treaties and the colonial laws? When a wrong was done, it was balanced, not with courts or papers or negotiations, but with direct action. Blood for blood, theft for theft, burning for burning. I remember," Hatchety said. "I also remember him teaching us that the old ways don't always work in the new world, that sometimes we have to adapt or die." "And what do you call what's happening now?" Talonige gestured toward the ruins of their village, invisible through the trees but present in both their minds. "Is this adaptation? Is this survival? Or is this just dying slowly instead of all at once?" Hatchety had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a while, watching the forest wake up around them, birds returning to their songs, insects humming in the undergrowth, the eternal cycle of life that had existed here long before colonists or treaties or wars. Talonige thought about his grandfather, who had fought in the old wars against rival tribes and Creek factions, who had seen the first white settlers arrive, and had warned that they would never stop coming, never stop taking, until everything was gone. "If I do this thing," Talonige said slowly, "it won't be for revenge. It will be because someone has to show them that we're not defeated, that we still have teeth, that there are consequences for breaking treaties and stealing children. And if you fail, if they catch you and hang you from their fort walls, then at least I died trying to do something instead of sitting in a cave arguing about it." Hatchety stood up, his jaw tight. "You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you?" "Yes." "Then I'm coming with you." Talonige looked at his cousin in surprise. "No. This is my decision, my responsibility. I won't drag you into it." "You're not dragging me anywhere," Hatchety said firmly. "We're family, we're warriors. If you're going to do this thing, you're not doing it alone." Before Talonige could respond, Onopoli appeared at the edge of the outcropping, his expression unreadable. "The Miko wants to see you both," he said. "Now." They followed the elder back to the council chamber, where they found the Miko sitting alone by the fire. He looked tired, older than he had that morning, the weight of leadership visible in every line of his face. "Sit," he said. They sat. The Miko studied them for a long moment, then sighed. "Sanetlichi told me something after the council ended. She said the ancestors showed her a vision, a fort burning in the night, children walking free, a young warrior standing in the ashes. She said the vision felt inevitable, like water flowing downhill, like something that would happen whether we willed it or not." He paused, then continued, "I am the Miko. It is my responsibility to think of the whole nation, not just one village or one raid. I have to consider consequences that stretch years into the future, wars that haven't started yet, treaties that might be signed or broken based on what we do today. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Miko," Talonige said. "But I am also Creek," the Miko continued, "and I know what it means when someone comes to your home, burns it, steals your children, and faces no consequences. I know what that does to a people's spirit. I know that sometimes, no matter how wise we try to be, the only response to violence is more violence." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I cannot order you to attack that fort, Talonige. If I did that, I would be starting a war that could destroy us all. but I also cannot stop you from doing what you believe is right. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Talonige felt his heart beating faster. "I think so. If you do this thing, if you go to that fort, you will be acting alone, without the Miko's blessing or the nation's support. If you succeed, we will say you were a rogue warrior seeking personal vengeance, and we will distance ourselves from your actions to protect the treaty. If you fail, we will mourn you, but we will not go to war over your death. You will have no official support, no backup, no rescue if things go wrong. Is that clear?" "Yes, Miko." "And yet," the Miko said, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, "if you were to free those captives and burn that illegal fort, and if you were to do it in a way that looked like the action of one warrior rather than an organized attack, then perhaps the colonists would think twice before building another fort on our land. Perhaps they would understand that treaties work both ways, and that there are still Creek warriors who remember the old ways." He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "I have said what I can say. The rest is between you and the ancestors. May they guide your path, Talonige." As they left the chamber, Hatchati whispered, "Did the Miko just give us permission?" "No," Talonige said. "He gave us deniability, which is the next best thing." That night, Talonige sat with his mother beside the cave fire, neither of them speaking for a long time. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're going, aren't you?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected this answer. "Your father would have done the same. He never could stand by and watch injustice without acting." "I'm not trying to be like father," Talonige said. "I'm just trying to do what's right." "I know." She took his hand. "But that doesn't make it easier for me to let you go." They talked long into the night, about his father who had died fighting in the revolution, about his grandfather's teachings, about what it meant to be Creek in a world that seemed determined to erase them. When dawn finally came, Talonige felt clearer than he had in days. He knew what he had to do. He spent the next day gathering supplies and preparing himself mentally and spiritually for what was coming. Zanette Lichi found him at dusk and performed a purification ritual, burning sacred herbs and speaking prayers in the old language. She painted his face with white clay mixed with ash, marking him as a warrior on a sacred mission. "You walk a dangerous path," she said, "but the ancestors will watch over you. Remember, this is not about revenge. It is about restoring balance." "I'll remember," Talonige promised. As night fell over the Georgia forest, he checked his weapons one final time. His knife, newly sharpened, his bow and a quiver of arrows, a tomahawk his grandfather had given him, and a small clay pot containing coals from the sacred fire, wrapped in damp moss to keep them alive but not burning. Hatchati appeared at his side, similarly armed and prepared. "Ready, cousin?" "Ready." They slipped into the forest as darkness deepened, two shadows moving through the pines toward a fort that didn't know they were coming. Behind them, the hidden village held its breath and waited to see what the morning would bring. The moon was a thin crescent, barely visible through the thick canopy of Georgia pine as Talonige and Hatchati approached the fort. They had traveled in complete silence for 2 hours, communicating only through hand signals and the subtle movements that warriors learned from childhood. The humid night air clung to their skin like a second layer of clothing, and insects hummed their endless song around them. They stopped on the same ridge, where Talonige had observed the fort 2 nights before, crouching in the shadows to study the compound below. Torches burned at the front gate and watchtower, casting pools of yellow light that created as much shadow as illumination. The rest of the fort was dark, except for the faint glow of banked fires visible through gaps in the log walls. Talonige counted guards. 2 at the watchtower, one making rounds along the western wall, another smoking a pipe near the horse corral. 4 men awake, which meant roughly 40 asleep in the barracks. The odds were impossible by any conventional measure. But conventional warfare wasn't what Talonige had in mind. He touched Hatcheti's arm and pointed toward the river, indicating they should circle around to approach from the north, where the forest grew closest to the fort walls. His cousin nodded understanding, and they began their careful descent from the ridge. Moving through the forest at night required a different kind of awareness than daylight travel. Every sound was magnified. The snap of a twig could sound like a gunshot, the rustle of leaves like a windstorm. But Tahlonig had been trained for this since he was old enough to walk. He placed each foot with ritual care, testing the ground before committing his weight, flowing around obstacles rather than through them. It took them nearly an hour to cover the half-mile to the northern approach. When they finally reached the tree line, they were less than 30 paces from the fort's rear wall. From this angle, they could see the horse corral clearly. The animals were restless, sensing something unusual in the night air. Beyond the corral, the low stable building sat dark and quiet. Tahlonig unwrapped the clay pot containing the sacred fire coals. The embers still glowed faintly, kept alive by the damp moss and his careful tending during the journey. He'd gathered dry pine needles and kindling earlier in the day, along with strips of birch bark that would catch fire quickly and burn hot. He looked at Hatcheti and gestured toward the guard on the western wall. They needed him distracted. His cousin understood immediately and disappeared into the shadows, moving east along the tree line. Tahlonig waited, his heart steady despite the enormity of what he was about to do. This wasn't about personal glory or revenge. This was about sending a message that could not be ignored or explained away by colonial authorities. This was about showing that Creek land was still Creek land, and that violations would be answered. A stone clattered against the fort's eastern wall, Hatcheti's signal. The guard turned toward the sound, bringing his musket to bear, peering into the darkness beyond the torchlight. In that moment of distraction, Tahlonig crossed the open ground to the corral fence with the fluid speed of a hunting cat. The horses snorted and shifted nervously as he approached, but they didn't panic. Tahlonig had always had a way with animals, a calmness they seemed to recognize. He moved to the corner post where the corral fence met the stable wall and began building his first fire. He worked quickly but carefully, arranging the kindling and bark in a precise pattern his grandfather had taught him, not a random pile that might produce smoke before flame, but a deliberate structure that would catch fast and burn hot. He whispered a prayer as he worked, asking the fire spirits to lend their strength to his cause, asking the ancestors to witness this act of reclamation. The ember from the sacred pot touched the birch bark, and flame blossomed immediately. Tahlonig fed it carefully, adding twigs and pine needles, building the fire until it was strong enough to sustain itself. Then he moved to the stable door. The building was locked with a simple wooden bar, easy enough to lift from the outside. Tahlonig eased it aside and pulled the door open, revealing the dark interior where he could hear horses moving in their stalls. He didn't have time to free them all individually, so instead he opened the wide rear doors that led directly into the corral, creating a clear path to freedom. Then he built his second fire. This one he placed at the front of the stable, between the open door and the nearest stall, using more of the sacred embers and a larger supply of kindling. As the flames grew, the horses began to panic, whinnying and kicking at their stall doors. Tahlonig moved from stall to stall, releasing the latches, letting the frightened animals bolt toward the open rear doors and out into the corral. The fire was spreading now, catching on the dry hay and ancient wood of the stable structure. Tahlonig knew he had perhaps 2 minutes before someone noticed. He slipped back out the rear doors just as shouts erupted from the fort. Someone had spotted the flames. He found Hatcheti waiting in the tree line, and together they watched as chaos erupted in the compound. Men poured out of the barracks in various states of undress, some carrying buckets, others grabbing weapons, all of them shouting contradictory orders. The horses that had escaped the stable were now running wild through the corral and fortyard, adding to the confusion. But Tahlonig's work wasn't finished. While the settlers focused on the stable fire, He and Hatchety circled to the southern side of the fort where the prison building stood. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. The prison was close to the main barracks, and they would be completely exposed once they broke cover. But the fire had created the distraction they needed. Every able-bodied man in the fort was either fighting the flames or trying to control the panicked horses. The guard who had been at the watchtower had abandoned his post to help with the crisis. Talonege touched the sacred clay markings on his face, feeling the dried mud crack slightly with the movement. Then he ran. He covered the distance to the prison building in seconds, pressing himself against the log wall and listening. Inside, he could hear voices, frightened children calling out, women trying to calm them, everyone confused by the noise and chaos outside. The prison door was more substantial than the stable, thick wood, reinforced with iron bands, locked with a heavy bolt and chain. Talonege examined it quickly in the firelight that now illuminated much of the fort yard. The lock was beyond his ability to pick, but the hinges were on the outside, held by long iron pins. He pulled out his tomahawk and began working on the lowest hinge pin, hammering it upward with quick, controlled strikes. The sound of metal on metal was loud, but the crackling fire and shouting men covered it. The pin came loose, then the middle pin, then the top one. The door sagged inward, still held by the lock and chain, but no longer truly secured. Talonege braced himself and kicked hard at the weakened door. It gave way with a splintering crash, falling inward and revealing the dark interior of the prison. "It's Talonege," he called out in Creek. "I'm here to take you home." Faces appeared in the darkness. Children, women, a few young men who had been captured. 19 souls, just as Onapoli had said. They stared at him in disbelief and desperate hope. "Quickly," he urged. "Follow me and stay low." They poured out of the prison, moving with the urgency of people who had been waiting for any chance at freedom. Talonege saw Metalin's son, Tuskia, among them, the boy's face streaked with tears and dirt. An older woman he recognized as Haweka, a basket weaver from his village, limped out last, her ankle clearly injured. "Can you run?" he asked her. "I can do what I need to do," she said grimly. A shout went up from near the front gate. Someone had finally noticed the broken prison door and the fleeing captives. A musket fired, the ball whistling past Talonege's head to splinter a log behind him. He pushed the freed prisoners toward the southern wall where Hatchety was waiting. "Go!" Talonege shouted. "Follow the man in the trees. He'll take you to safety." He turned back toward the fort, knowing he needed to buy them time. The stable was fully engulfed now, flames reaching 30 feet into the night sky, the heat intense enough to make the air shimmer. Men were abandoning the firefighting effort, realizing they couldn't save the structure, instead trying to prevent the fire from spreading to the barracks. Talonege made a decision that would change everything. He ran not away from the fort, but toward the barracks, pulling out the last of his sacred embers. The building's log walls were old and dry, and he knew from his earlier observation that the settlers stored their gunpowder inside. If he could start a fire there, if he could make the structure itself a threat, the settlers would have to evacuate completely. He reached the barracks wall and began building his third fire at the building's corner, where the logs met and formed a natural chimney effect. This time he used everything, all his remaining kindling, bark, even stripping moss from nearby trees to pack around the growing flames. He whispered prayers as he worked, not for victory, but for justice, for balance, for the restoration of what had been stolen. The fire caught and began climbing the wall. "Fire in the barracks!" someone screamed. Talonege ran. He sprinted across the fort yard, leaped over a fence, dodged a settler who tried to grab him, and crashed through the main gate that had been left open during the chaos. Behind him, the fort erupted in panic as men realized their ammunition store was about to go up in flames. He didn't look back. He ran into the forest, following the path Hatchety would have taken with the freed captives, trusting his knowledge of the land to guide him through the darkness. He could hear pursuit behind him, angry shouts crashing through underbrush, the sounds of men who didn't know the forest the way he did. A musket fired, then another. The bulls struck trees somewhere to his left, wide of the mark. Settlers might be good soldiers, but they were poor hunters, and tracking a Creek warrior through a Georgia forest at night was beyond their skill. Talonege ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, following landmarks he knew even in darkness, a distinctive rock formation, a creek crossing, a lightning-struck oak. Finally, he heard a low whistle ahead and recognized Hatchetee's signal. His cousin emerged from behind a massive pine, and behind him the freed captives huddled together, exhausted but alive. Young Tuskia ran to Talonege and wrapped his arms around the warrior's waist. "You came back for us," the boy whispered. "I told them you would come." Talonege put his hand on the child's head. "I promised your mother I would bring you home. A Creek warrior keeps his promises." They rested for a few minutes, listening for pursuit, but heard nothing except the normal sounds of the forest. The settlers had given up the chase, probably retreating to save what they could of their fort. Talonege allowed himself a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what he had done. "Was it enough?" Hatchetee asked quietly. "Will they understand the message?" "They'll understand," Talonege said. "The question is what they'll do about it." They gathered the freed captives and began the careful journey back to the hidden caves, moving slowly to accommodate the injured and exhausted. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the ridge, overlooking their temporary village, and Talonege could see figures moving below, people emerging from the caves to begin another day of displacement and uncertainty. Then someone spotted them. The cry went up, "They're back! The captives are back!" And suddenly people were running up the slope, mothers finding children, families reuniting in tearful embraces. Metalin grabbed her son and sobbed into his hair, whispering prayers of gratitude. The elders gathered around, counting heads, verifying that everyone was safe. Onapoli approached Talonege, his face unreadable. "You did it," he said simply. "You actually did it." "We did it," Talonege corrected, gesturing to Hatchetee. "My cousin risked as much as I did." The Miko appeared, his expression grave. "Come with me," he said. "We need to talk." Talonege followed him to a quiet spot away from the celebrations. The Miko stood with his back to the rising sun, his face in shadow. "The fort?" he asked. "Burning," Talonege said. "The stable is gone completely. The barracks was on fire when we left. If their powder magazine went up, the whole structure is probably destroyed by now." "And the settlers?" "I didn't kill anyone," Talonege said carefully. "I set fires and freed prisoners. If men died because they couldn't put out the flames in time, that's different than me hunting them down and slaughtering them." The Miko nodded slowly. "That distinction may matter." "It may not. Either way, you've done something that can't be undone, Talonege. You've shown them that we're not beaten, that we still have warriors who will defend our land, but you've also given them a reason to retaliate, and that retaliation will fall on all of us, not just you." "I know," Talonege said. "But what was the alternative? To let them keep building forts, keep taking our land, keep stealing our children, while we wait for treaties and councils that never come. At some point, we have to fight back, or we're just slowly agreeing to our own erasure." "Perhaps," the Miko said. "Time will tell if you've struck a blow for justice or just given them the excuse they needed to destroy us completely." He paused, then added, "But I'll say this. You've reminded our people that we're not helpless. That matters too." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You should know. Runners have already gone out to the other villages to spread the word of what happened here. By tomorrow, every Creek town in the region will know about the warrior who burned the fort while they slept. Some will call you a hero, some will call you a fool, but everyone will remember your name." Talonege watched the Miko walk away, then turned to look at the forest that stretched endlessly in all directions. His home, his people's land, the territory they had held for generations before the colonists came with their treaties and forts and promises. He thought about the fire burning behind him, visible as a distant column of smoke rising into the dawn sky. He had done what he set out to do. He had freed the captives, destroyed the fort, sent a message that could not be ignored. But he also understood, with the clarity that came from exhaustion and adrenaline fading, that this was just the beginning. The colonists would come back, probably with more soldiers, more forts, more determination to punish the Creek for this defiance. And when they did, Taloneg would have to answer for what he had done, not just to the colonists, but to his own people, who would bear the consequences of his actions, whether they had supported them or not. He touched the clay markings on his face, now cracked and fading in the morning light, and whispered a prayer to the ancestors. He had walked the path they showed him. Now he would see where it led. 3 days passed before the colonial response came, and when it did, it arrived not with soldiers,